Hello, I'm Paul Pirello, and welcome to the Philly Factor. As many people in Philadelphia may know, the city has the distinction of being the home of two saints of the Roman Catholic Church. St. John Newman was canonized a saint in 1977. His tomb is in the basement of St. Peter's Church on North 5th Street. And in 2000, Katharine Drexel was canonized a saint by Pope John Paul II, an American heiress, philanthropist, religious sister, educator, and foundress of the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament. She is buried at the Order's Mother House in Bucks County. One of the people that was on hand that day in Rome for the canonization was Cordelia Francis Biddle, a direct descendant of Francis Martin Drexel, grandfather of St. Katharine Drexel. Cordelia Francis Biddle joins me on our program to talk about her new book, St. Katharine, The Life of Katharine Drexel. I want to say what a pleasure it is to meet you.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for talking about Katharine, because
Yeah.
your mission is extraordinary.
And extraordinary today, as well as it was back in the day, Cordelia. I mean, talk about a pioneer. I mean, I don't want to say threw caution to the wind, but she took,
Yeah.
she took this money that was left to her when her father passed away, and she said, I'm not going to follow like my sisters and get married and raise children and be involved in philanthropic efforts. But what I'm going to do is go into the religious order of nuns, what was the reaction of the family?
Oh, her sisters were very supportive, but her cousins, I don't think so. I think it was really kind of hurtful to them because it put into high relief their own choices. I mean, they were philanthropic people, they were charitable, but they lived in palatial houses and owned yachts. Her cousin George had a yacht that was 300 feet in length and had a crew of 100. So here she is saying, I'm going to live a life of poverty and devote everything I have, including my life, to serving the poorest of the poor. And I think that was hard for them. They were religious people, they attended church, but what did that say about their own lives? So there was, I think, a beginning of a disconnect between her cousins, at least, and her.
You were in Rome the day that she was canonized in 2000. And from what I read, it was that moment. And and I remember it vividly because I covered not in Rome, but here in the United States, here in the Philadelphia area. The day was pretty dreary. It was
dreary, it was pouring.
It was pouring until Pope John Paul II actually announced the words of canonization when the skies cleared.
Oh, it was miraculous. I mean, it really was. And I try to describe it to people who weren't there, and they say, you're making it up. But it was, St. Peter's Square was a sea of umbrellas. If you look at photographs, it's just one black umbrella dripping onto the shoulders of another person. And my shoes were ruined. They were sitting in probably that much amount of water. Yeah. It was a deluge. And her name was announced, and all of a sudden, the skies cleared. And there was a rainbow. I'm not making this up. There was a rainbow. All the pigeons flew up in the air. Wow. It was such a holy moment, and I thought, I have to write this woman's story. What is happening? What's happening? And I don't think there was a person there in the middle of the square who didn't begin to pray because it was such a powerful moment.
Yeah. So you decide to write this book.
Yes.
One would think, because you're a direct descendant, that it would be an easy task for you because she was a family member. But part of me also wonders how difficult it was for you to write it, because not that she was a complicated person, but you're getting to the real essence of who Katharine Drexel was.
Absolutely. And it was, I won't say easy to write about the family connections, but it certainly was available to me. I grew up hearing stories about my grandfather and his family, and my grandfather's mother was Katharine's first cousin. So I came to the story in that manner of sort of family. And then I started to do historical research because I wanted to place her into full context of the turmoil within our nation, because she was 7 years old when Lincoln was assassinated, and show the reader, take the reader along the long journey of her life historically. But then when I got to her, I felt stymied at first, because I felt that I wasn't a good enough person to write her story, holy enough maybe. I thought I was a good enough writer,
Right.
but not holy enough. And so that was my own journey to understand her, the religious part of her life that impelled her onward to be Jesus's disciple, to be God's hands and heart and feet at work in the world.
It's a truly remarkable story to think about her work today when she actually did it. But at the time, and you talk about the turbulent time that the country was going through when she was growing up, she decides she's going to become a member of a religious order. She wants to help Native Americans and blacks in the United States, at which time these two segments of population were pretty much dismissed by the general population of the United States.
Absolutely.
So it was pretty remarkable that she was going into a religious life, but now she's dedicating herself to two segments of the population that were not part of the mainstream population.
No, she was living out her gospel faith. This was what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And those were the two, they were completely ignored. African Americans, Native Americans had no access to education, and she understood that if they were going to compete in the, quote, white man's world, they had to have an education. So she started schools in the far west first. She wasn't about conversion, she was about education. And then she went down south and started schools in Virginia first, and then went deep into the South and fought against the KKK. In one instance in Beaumont, Texas in 1919, the KKK posted one of her schools, meaning they were going to burn it to the ground if they didn't stop teaching. And the sisters then were referred to by some of the Southerners as the nigger sisters. They hated the fact that they were giving education to people that they felt should not be educated. And the Klan, fascinatingly, posted the school the afternoon after she had left. She left in the morning to go back to New Orleans, and they posted the school that afternoon. They were frightened of her. She was this petite woman, but she was indomitable. And I'm sure if she'd seen them, she would have said, "You go away." And they would have.
Yeah. She really had no fear. I mean, she stood up not only for these two groups, but she stood up for what was right. And it was remarkable because oftentimes you can't even find a man to stand up for what is right. Here was a woman, a religious woman, who was telling these people that I'm going to do God's work and you're not going to stand in my way.
Yes, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And she did that throughout. There's a wonderful story of someone who met her, and as she created these schools and grew older, that sort of the story of her spread, and the story of how much good she was doing spread. And she was always asked for interviews, but she was very retiring and humble, and she didn't really want to do that. And someone finally got to meet her, and he said, "Oh, I'm so disappointed." And she said, "Most people usually are."
You know, there's an interesting story that I had heard about, and you recount in your book. She has an audience with the Pope. I think it was it Pope Leo?
Yes.
Okay. And she goes to the Pope, and part of me wonders, was it her background from America and her family that got her in to see the Pope? And she basically asks him for help in staffing these schools that she was building, and the Pope basically puts it right back in her lap and says, "Why don't you establish the teaching sisters to go and staff these schools?"
Yes, yes, yes. Now, that story it's very hard to confirm whether he actually said it or whether she heard it, because there's no confirmation. She became very ill after that encounter. This was before, obviously before she'd started her own order, and she and her sisters had this, this wonderful experience of meeting the Pope, and she said, we need missionaries to go out, we need education to go out to the far west. And whether he said, why not, my child, yourself do this work, or whether she heard that, it's hard to interpret what exactly happened. But she accepted that moment as a defining moment of her life. She became very ill afterwards. I mean, it was so troubling to her and so frightening. I mean, imagine if Pope Francis said to you, Paul, you know what, you need to do this work. It would be terrifying. It would be wonderful, but it would also be terrifying.
It puts tremendous responsibility
absolutely,
on it, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When I followed the developments of her beatification and ultimate canonization, I met a lot of people that actually had contact with Mother Drexel. They were very small and very young at the time. There was a gentleman here at LaSalle who remembers walking by when she would be sitting on the front porch, and just an unassuming woman sitting on the porch, dressed in her, her religious habit. But when you talk about saints, we oftentimes think of the saints that lived in the 12th century and the 14th century and maybe even the 18th and 19th century. But she's a contemporary woman for a contemporary time.
Yes.
And many people did have and still have some type of direct connection with Mother Drexel.
Yes, they do. And in fact, there was a nun who had been her night nurse, whom I met when I started work on the book. She has since died. But she was a young woman who had just come from Ireland, and Mother Catherine was elderly and frail then. She suffered a series of strokes toward the end of her life. And this wonderful woman, Sister Inez, such a great sense of humor, and she said, so she was sitting there and during the night, and the Mother Catherine was asleep, or so she thought. And so she picked up the Bible that was beside the bed, and she started thumbing through it. Mother Catherine's eyes jumped open. She said, I hope you're not losing my place. Which is lovely, because she was very human.
Yeah.
And what I tried to do in the book was to make her human, really understand who she was as a child, who she became as an adult, how she made this enormous decision, and made decisions throughout her life, and what that cost her emotionally, but what she gained emotionally. And because I think it's very easy for us to say, there's a saint, put the picture on the wall, and forget about them. But she was a real living, breathing woman, and remained that way. She had a wonderful sense of humor. She could be impatient, and she knew it. Her early journals show her as having a fabulous sense of, sort of wicked sense of humor. She was very vain about her clothes. I love all of that because it makes her a real teenager.
Sure, yeah. When you were doing your research for this book, was there anything that you stumbled upon? Anything that you, I mean, because when I hear you recount the stories about her having a sense of humor, we don't necessarily think of saints having a sense of humor. We always think of them in a life of prayer and solidarity, and their not to be bothered, but some of the stories you even recount in the book, there is this sense of humor that, and so was there anything else that you discovered about her that you were surprised to learn about?
I think her fierceness, because there again, you don't think of saints as being fierce, but she felt so determined that there should be no racial injustice, that there should be no injustice. And she became very fierce about that. So she did her work, but if anybody got in her way, she was determined and dogged. And so she had gone from her early journals, which I found at the Mother House in Bensalem, of being the giddy teenager who's going to Europe with her parents when she's 15 and having these sort of mild flirtations and pressing flowers in an album and so on, to a woman who basically said, get out of my way. We have to do this work.
Yeah. Was there, I mean, given her tremendous wealth, was there anything that pointed her in the direction to right the wrongs of society? I mean, oftentimes people will try to, or will herald a cause because they themselves may have grown up in an orphanage. So they then form an orphanage, or they form a society that will help those that are less fortunate. I mean, she came from all this wealth and this affluence, but was there anything that caused her to say, these are the people that I want to help? I want to help the African Americans, and I want to help the Native Americans. I mean, why did she single out these groups? Because there was so much social injustice toward those two groups of the population?
I believe that's true, Paul, and I remember that Lincoln's funeral cortege passed directly in front of her house when she was 7. I think that was a traumatic and life-altering moment in her life, because the Drexel family had, as you said, great wealth. They had been able to supply the Union's cause with a loan of $60 million, which I can't even imagine, in the billions then.
Sure, yeah.
To help fight the war, because Lincoln freed the slaves. She grew up hearing those stories, and I think that was a defining moment. I mean, she was 7, and we think of 7-year-olds as being little children, but they are little sponges, really, in terms of understanding how the world works. And then one of her spiritual advisors, her spiritual advisor, James O'Connor, who had been her parish priest, he became Bishop of Omaha. So he then introduced her to this greater cause. But remember also, this was the genocide of the Native American peoples. It was in the newspaper all the time. You know, there were people who were fighting war. The Indian Wars is what they were called. So I think she couldn't help but be surrounded. That's the history that I'm talking about.
Yeah. When you attended that canonization, and other members of the Drexel family attended the canonization, what was it like for the family to know that there was this remarkable woman who not only was part of the family, but is now part of the entire world? I mean, she's being recognized and singled out as a saint of the Catholic Church. How does the family embrace that idea or that concept?
Well, I think probably we were very proud, naturally, but I think it was a bit daunting for all of us, because there again, it was saying to us, what are you doing with your life? She did this, and so the euphoria of, wow, that's our relative, and her name is being called out, and the skies are clearing, and this is this extraordinary, miraculous moment. And the next you start saying, what about me? Who am I? And I'm hoping that people who read the book will have that sense of, what am I doing? What am I doing to make the world a better place? We can't be saints, but could we just take a little step?
Yeah. And that's so important, because there are those individuals that are singled out and get all the attention, but there are so many other people that are doing similar tremendous works in their community, in their city, in their country. And I think that's the legacy, is that, Katharine Drexel went from this tremendous wealth. She could have had anything or anybody, and she decided to give it all up for her faith, her God, her church. And she made a change. I mean, she affected change. And oftentimes, and here it is, 14, 15 years after her canonization, And us in Philadelphia, we know the name Katharine Drexel. We know the woman. We know the saint. Your book will help us know a little bit more about this person who walked among us. And hopefully that reignites maybe that spirit of desire or want to make the world a better place. I hope that's people that pick up the book come away with that, because I think that would be Katharine Drexel's legacy, is that her work did not end on that day in the year 2000, but her work continues, and all of her schools are still going. I mean, most notably Xavier University, which is a university that she founded. I mean, all of her works continue. We may not hear that much about her today, but her work is still ongoing out there.
Absolutely, and doing research, I went to Xavier, which I think I was so moved to be there and to see as any students. I teach at Drexel University, so you see the students and you see how engaged they are and excited, and you realize she did this, and I'm walking among them and they don't know who I am, and it was a wonderful moment of saying I'm just a fly speck on the wall, and I'm seeing her legacy. But then after I spent time in the archives, I went to the art studio and met a man there who had studied with a MacArthur Grant Award winner named John Scott. And John Scott had been one of the first art students at the school. And so the legacy, and he was a very poor man who wouldn't have had any education at all, ever, were it not for Mother Katharine. And so he then talked about passing it on, passing this legacy on. And he passed that legacy on to his student who spoke with me, who was ready to retire and who was passing that legacy on to other students. So it's an ongoing, you share it.
In the few minutes we have left here, given all the attention that was focused on Katharine Drexel, and she must have known in her life that a lot of people were watching every move that she was making, everything that she was doing, even when she was on her deathbed. She must have known that people were watching. I mean, now as you reflect back on her life, how would she have handled all of this attention, given the research that you've done and knowing a little bit about who she really was? How would she have handled this attention in 21st century America?
Oh, that's a good question. She was very humble. There were times when I was writing her story when I felt that she was blocking me from writing it because she didn't want herself to be the center of focus. And I actually had to talk to her. I know this sounds very weird, but I had to talk to her and say, it's not about you, it's about your work. It's about helping other people. So you have to be in the story, but please don't be so humble that you pull it back. Because even when Xavier University was officially opened in its new, very grand buildings in 1933, she didn't appear on the dais.
Really?
She stayed inside. You can just see a photograph. There's a photograph of all the very renowned people who were making speeches, and there she is, just a person in the window in the back, because it wasn't about her. It was about the work. That's who she was. So I'm not sure. She wouldn't have been tweeting, that's for sure.
Very funny. Although, given her sense of humor,
Well, maybe she
would.
been.
It seemed to me that she would embrace, look, the Pope has embraced
that's right.
Twitter
That's
and
right.
Facebook and all that, so you never know.
They could have been sharing emails back and forth.
That is true, too. What do you hope, in the minute or two that we have, that people take away from your book when they read this remarkable work that you've given us about Katharine Drexel?
I hope that they understand that saints are among us everywhere, and that really this is our mission in this world, our ministry as people of faith, to help those in distress. And it doesn't have to be in a grandiose way like hers. She started just with one school and then one other school. So it's really understanding that we can all do something to help others. And also recognizing that here's a person that we all now revere as a saint, but she was a real human being who didn't start out thinking that she was bound for sainthood. She would have scoffed at it. In fact, there was one time when Bishop O'Connor was joking, and they were emailing, excuse me, they were writing letters back and forth, and he sort of referred to her as a saint, and she poo-pooed that notion.
Really? Yeah.
Because that was not who she thought she was.
Yeah. But do you think Bishop O'Connor saw something there?
Yes.
Realized something there
Yes.
even then?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because she was so driven. I mean, you know, you look at St. Francis of Assisi, that was his mission, you know, or St. Clare, you know, that was her mission.
The name of the book, again, is Katharine Drexel. It is, her new book is St. Catherine, The Life of Katharine Drexel. It is not only a book for us here in Philadelphia to read and enjoy and understand, but really is a book for people of all walks of life to read. And again, knowing that, you know, in some small way, we could all contribute to the bigger picture of doing God's work here on earth. And you don't necessarily have to come from a big, rich family, but even in your own small way, just pay it forward, like that gentleman you talked about at Xavier University.
Yeah.
Cordelia, I want to thank you so much for your time.
Thank
I
you,
thoroughly
Paul.
enjoyed the book. I have not gotten through it all, but it's one of those books I keep picking up and going to. She was a remarkable woman, and I want to thank you for your contributions to the book, and I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Paul. I've loved being here.
Thank you very much. Until the next time, my name is Paul Pirello. Thanks so much for being with us here on the Philly Factor.